Kofi walked slowly through the village, pushing a wheelbarrow full of vegetables. His clothes were simple, worn, faded, but his posture was straight, his face calm. He had the look of a man who knew his place, yet it was a place that few could understand. To the villagers, he was just another commoner, another man toiling under the hot African sun. But what they did not know was that Kofi, the wheelbarrow pusher, was the heir to a vast fortune, a man who could have lived in the finest house, wearing the finest clothes, with servants at his beck and call. Yet here he was, choosing to live among the people, choosing a life of anonymity, trying to understand the struggles of those who had no choice but to live as he did. He passed by Akua, who was standing near her father's merchant stall, surrounded by beautiful silks and brightly colored fabrics. Her golden necklace caught the sunlight, and her eyes sparkled with the promise of a life of wealth and luxury. When she saw Kofi, she sneered, a flicker of disdain in her gaze. "Why do you waste your time with that wheelbarrow?" she asked, her voice dripping with the arrogance of someone born into privilege. "Why not use your money and make something of yourself?" Kofi's eyes met hers, but he said nothing. He had heard this many times before. Aqua, like so many others, had no idea who he truly was. To her, he was just another poor soul, a man who lacked ambition, who lacked the power to change his fate. But there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of curiosity, perhaps even regret. She watched him as he walked past, pushing his wheelbarrow with quiet determination. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and Aqua felt a strange tug in her heart, something that couldn't be explained. It was not the wealth that drew her to him, not his simple, humble ways. No, it was something deeper, something she had yet to understand. Mama Afia, the wise elder of the village, had been watching from her porch. She was an old woman, her hair silver and her face etched with the marks of wisdom. She had seen many generations come and go, and though she was well respected, she was also a quiet observer, always waiting for the right moment to speak. She had seen Kofi long before the rest of the villagers had taken notice of him, and she saw something in him that others could not. There was a strength in his silence, a quiet dignity that could not be ignored. Kofi was more than he appeared. She knew that. Perhaps he was the one who would bridge the gap between the old ways and the new. As the evening approached, the village gathered for its nightly ritual, the sound of drums echoing across the plains. Mama Afia stood before the gathering, her voice strong and steady as she spoke to the villagers. "Tonight," she began, "we gather not just to honor our ancestors, but to reflect on the path we walk. For the world changes, as it always does, but the wisdom of our ancestors must guide us." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd, resting on Kofi for a moment. He stood at the edge of the gathering, his wheelbarrow now empty, his gaze fixed on the fire as if he were contemplating the future. "Some of you," Mama Afia continued, "look to the world beyond our village and dream of riches. But what is wealth if not the heart of a man? What is wealth if not the good deeds you do for your neighbors, the love you share, and the humility with which you serve your people?" Aqua, standing among the villagers, felt the weight of Mama Afia's words. Her mind flashed to the silks and jewels that filled her father's shop, to the life she had always dreamed of. But a seed had been planted in her heart, a seed that questioned everything she had been taught to value. As the fire crackled and the villagers sang the old songs, the tension between tradition and modernity simmered just beneath the surface. Kofi stood alone, a man of two worlds, caught between the life he had chosen and the life he could have had. The village, divided by its own struggles, had yet to understand the man who walked among them, humble in appearance, but a giant in spirit. And as the night wore on, Kofi felt the stirrings of something inside him, something that had been growing for a long time. He could no longer hide in the shadows. It was time for the village to see who he truly was, and in doing so, they would learn what it truly meant to be rich. The village had yet to realize it, but their story was only just beginning, and the winds of change were blowing. Kofi woke up with the first light of dawn, the golden rays stretching across the savannah like the fingers of a hand, pushing aside the night's darkness. The air was warm, but the promise of a long, hard day clung to him like the dust that stuck to his skin. He rubbed his eyes and stood up from his mat, his bones aching from the weight of the world he carried, both seen and unseen. As he shuffled out of his humble home made of mud and thatch, he could already hear the mocking voices of the village. It was a song that played every morning, a rhythm of ridicule that never ceased. "Look at Kofi, pushing that wheelbarrow again, just like a common man," Kojo's voice rang out, thick with disdain, causing the other villagers to burst into laughter. Kofi ignored them. He had learned long ago that the sharp sting of words was a better pain to endure than the searing burn of anger. His wheelbarrow was his constant companion, piled high with goods he would deliver to the nearby market. He worked tirelessly, his back bent, his hands calloused, but no matter how hard he worked, no matter how much sweat soaked his clothes, there was no escaping their judgment. "Look at him," Kojo sneered again, strutting past Kofi. "A poor man pretending to be something he's not. Do you see him in those ragged clothes? He looks like he's come from the bush, not from a wealthy family." The laughter grew louder, and Kofi could feel their eyes boring into his back. They couldn't see him for who he truly was, nor would they ever, not while he wore his humility like a second skin. But the ridicule, though painful, was only part of the battle. There was something deeper that weighed heavily on Kofi's heart. The fear of change that gripped his village, the fear that the old ways would be lost to the pull of the new. It was a fear that lurked behind every mocking word and dismissive glance. The elders, like Mama Afia, held tight to the traditions of their ancestors, but the younger generation, led by people like Aqua, dreamt of a life measured in wealth, status, and appearances. Kofi, with his quiet dignity, stood as a symbol of that divide. His life as a wheelbarrow pusher became a mirror of the village's internal struggle, and though the villagers mocked him, they feared him just as much. His presence was a reminder that things were changing. His humility, though painful to endure, was a challenge to their world. In the heart of the village, Aqua, the daughter of the wealthiest merchant, walked past Kofi, her gaze haughty, her eyes scanning the horizon, as if the dusty earth beneath her feet was beneath her notice. Her clothes sparkled in the morning sun, bright and vibrant, rich with the allure of her wealth. Kofi stood aside, but Aqua didn't spare him a glance. To her, he was nothing but a poor man, a wheelbarrow pusher who couldn't possibly be worthy of her attention. Her friends, the young men of the village, walked with her, laughing and jesting as they passed Kofi by. They spoke of their wealth, their land, their plans for the future, never once noticing the quiet figure of the man who stood silently with his wheelbarrow. "Who does he think he is?" Aqua whispered to her friends, her voice laced with scorn. "He doesn't even wear shoes. He's no better than a beggar." Her laughter filled the air, and the others joined in, but there was something in her gaze that flickered, something Kofi saw but didn't dare acknowledge. For a fleeting moment, her eyes lingered on him, on the quiet strength in his posture, the dignity that seemed to radiate from him, even in his worn clothes. But the moment passed, and with it, any hint of respect or curiosity was buried under layers of materialism and pride. Aqua had learned long ago that beauty and wealth were the only true measures of a person's worth. As Kofi made his way through the village, carrying the load on his back, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. His heart, though heavy with the sting of rejection, remained steadfast. In his mind, he repeated the words of Mama Afia, the elder who had always guided him with wisdom beyond her years. "Strength lies not in what the world sees," she had told him many times. "True strength comes from the heart, from the spirit, and from the quiet endurance of hardships. Do not seek to change the hearts of others, Kofi. Change yourself, and the world will follow." Her words were a balm for his weary soul. Yet there were days when the mockery felt like too much to bear. The labor was exhausting. His body ached, his hands bled, and still the villagers didn't see him. They didn't see the sacrifice in his eyes, nor did they understand the depth of his purpose. Mama Afia would often sit beside him after a long day of work, her weathered hands resting on her knees as she spoke to him. "Do not let the mockery of the world steal your peace, Kofi," she would say in her slow, deliberate voice. "What you are carrying in your heart is more valuable than all the gold and wealth they chase. Honor, humility, and strength. These things do not rust like gold. They remain with you always." Kofi would nod, his heart swelling with gratitude for her wisdom. And yet, the village's scorn never ceased. One evening, as the sun set over the savannah, casting long shadows across the village, Kojo passed by again. He sneered at Kofi, who was quietly preparing his wheelbarrow for another journey. "Do you think they'll ever respect you?" Kojo asked with a laugh, his voice dripping with venom. "You'll never amount to anything. You're just a poor man pretending to be something you're not." Kofi stood silently, not responding. He could feel the anger rising within him, but he swallowed it down. His silence was not born of fear, but of understanding. The words of his father echoed in his mind. His father, the great merchant who had given him everything and more, had once told him that a man's worth was not in the gold he possessed, but in the way he carried himself. "You carry yourself well, Kofi," his father had said, "and that is a gift more precious than any wealth. Never forget that." And so Kofi endured. He endured the mockery, the ridicule, the dismissive glances. His spirit, though weighed down, remained unbroken. He knew that one day, the villagers would see him for who he truly was, not a poor wheelbarrow pusher, but a man who carried something far greater than gold. And so, the day went on, the villagers' laughter growing faint in the distance, as Kofi continued his silent journey. His story was far from over. The sun had barely set when the dark clouds began to gather over the village. The air grew thick with tension, and the animals sensed it. Flocks of birds fluttered in a hurried frenzy, while goats and cattle trotted nervously in circles. The elders, who knew the signs, began to murmur in unease. The wind picked up, and before long, the sky opened, unleashing a torrential rain. The floodwaters surged forward like an unstoppable force, swallowing the fields and creeping toward the homes of the villagers. The sound of rushing water filled the air, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very earth beneath them. People scrambled, their faces twisted with fear as they sought refuge from the flood. Women clutched their children, shouting for the men to carry them to safety. The community's unity was tested as never before. "Mama Afia!" one of the villagers cried, looking toward the elder's hut. "What should we do? The water is rising too quickly." Mama Afia, the wise woman of the village, stood outside, watching the raging flood with calm eyes. "We must act fast," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "But we cannot forget the lesson the earth is giving us. We are tested not just by the floods, but by what lies within our hearts." As the floodwaters roared, a small, quiet figure emerged from the shadows. It was Kofi. The villagers had seen him daily, pushing his wheelbarrow, a simple man living a simple life. Yet now, as the storm raged, there was something different about him. His eyes were calm, his posture steady, as though he had long awaited this moment. He approached Mama Afia, who had already sensed that Kofi held a secret far deeper than anyone could imagine. The two exchanged a knowing look. "I have to tell you something, Mama Afia," Kofi began, his voice low but clear. "I am not who you think I am." Mama Afia nodded, her weathered face betraying a hint of understanding. "I have known for some time, Kofi. You have not spoken your truth, but your heart is not hidden from those who see." Kofi took a deep breath and, for the first time in his life, allowed the truth to spill from his lips. "I am not a poor man. I am a wealthy man, a billionaire. But I have chosen to live as I do, to understand the struggles of those who have less." Mama Afia's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on Kofi's shoulder. "The village will learn much from you, Kofi, not just about wealth, but about what it means to be truly rich."